The throne room of the Draconian Empire stretched for nearly 1,000 feet in every direction. Giant pillars of black stone rose from the polished floor and disappeared into shadows far above. Light came from 3 distant suns, their rays filtering through a dome of perfect crystal that had taken 10,000 workers 50 years to build. The light scattered into rainbows that danced across every surface, making the scales of every Draconian in the room shimmer like living jewels. Emperor the Magnificent sat upon his throne, and he was bored. The throne itself was a masterwork of obsidian and gold, carved from a single piece of volcanic glass that had been pulled from the heart of a dying world. It rose behind like the spread wings of some ancient beast, and lesser beings had been known to faint simply from standing in its presence. The emperor himself was equally impressive. He stood nearly 8 feet tall when he bothered to stand, which was not often these days. His scales were the deep gold of sunset, each one perfectly formed and gleaming with health. His crest rose from his skull like a crown of bone and membrane, and his eyes burned with the red fire that marked the imperial bloodline. He was the most powerful being in 100 star systems. He commanded fleets that could crack planets and armies that numbered in the billions. His word was law, his whim was destiny, and his anger was death. And right now, he was listening to his Minister of External Relations drone on about trade agreements, and he wanted very much to set something on fire. The Terran Confederacy has sent another diplomatic envoy, Minister was saying. The silver-scaled diplomat stood before the throne with his head properly bowed and his tail curled in the submissive position that court protocol demanded. They continue to request closer ties with the empire, trade agreements, cultural exchanges, the usual proposals. The usual groveling, you mean, said. His voice rumbled through the throne room like distant thunder, and several of the lesser courtiers flinched. These humans send the same messages every year. What makes this one different enough to waste my time? This time, Your Magnificence, they are offering something of actual value. Paused, clearly savoring the moment. They are offering quantum fold technology. The throne room fell silent. Leaned forward on his throne, his massive claws digging into the obsidian armrests. Around him, his courtiers had stopped their whispered conversations and their subtle positioning for favor. Every eye was now fixed on the minister. Quantum fold technology, repeated slowly. You mean their faster-than-light drive, the one that actually works? The same, Your Magnificence. Sat back, his mind racing behind his carefully composed expression. The Draconian Empire had ruled 100 star systems for 10,000 years, but they had done so the slow way. Their ships crawled between stars at fractions of light speed, their crews sleeping in frozen chambers for decades or centuries at a time. It was a limitation that had shaped their entire civilization, their expansion careful and methodical because anything else was simply impossible. And then the humans had appeared. The humans were newcomers to the galactic stage. They had achieved space flight barely 3 centuries ago, which was nothing in the timescales that Draconians measured history. They were small, soft, scaleless creatures with flat faces and dull teeth. They lived brief lives and bred like insects. By every measure that mattered, they should have been nothing more than a minor curiosity, another primitive species to be noted and ignored. Instead, they had somehow stumbled upon faster-than-light travel. The story was almost too absurd to believe. A human scientist had been trying to invent a better method of making their favorite hot beverage. Something had gone wrong. There had been an explosion, and when the smoke cleared, the scientist had accidentally created a device that could fold space itself, allowing a ship to travel between stars in hours instead of decades. They didn't even understand how it worked. Their own scientists admitted this freely. The device functioned through principles that violated everything the Draconians knew about physics, and yet it functioned nonetheless. It was humiliating. It was infuriating. And more than anything else, it was something wanted. "What do they want in exchange?" he asked. "A marriage alliance, your magnificence." His voice was carefully neutral. "They wish to establish a permanent bond between our peoples. One of your daughters wed to a human of suitable standing." The laughter that erupted from shook the crystal dome above and sent the lesser courtiers scrambling for cover. It was not a pleasant laugh. There was no warmth in it, no genuine humor. It was the laugh of a predator who had just spotted particularly stupid prey. "They want one of my daughters," roared between guffaws. "These tiny, hairless creatures want to marry into the imperial bloodline. They want to put their soft little hands on scales that carry the blood of 10,000 years of conquest." Around him, his courtiers began to laugh as well. It was expected. When the emperor found something funny, everyone found it funny. Those who did not learn this lesson quickly did not remain at court for long. "The audacity is remarkable, your magnificence," agreed smoothly. "However, the technology they offer is genuine. Our scientists have the capabilities of their quantum-fold drive. It would advance our own research by centuries, perhaps more." "Oh, I'm aware of its value." His laughter faded into something colder, more calculating. "I'm also aware that these humans have been expanding through the galaxy at a rate that will eventually bring them into conflict with our borders. Better to have them as allies than enemies, even if they are beneath us in every way that matters." He tapped one massive claw against his throne, the sound echoing through the suddenly silent room. "Very well, we will give them their marriage alliance. We will send them a princess." His smile showed every one of his gleaming teeth. "Bring me." The silence that followed was different from before. This was not the silence of courtiers waiting for their emperor to speak. This was the silence of beings who had just heard something so unexpected, so wrong, that they could not quite process it. "Your Magnificence," said carefully, "surely you mean one of the crown princess's younger sisters. Princess, perhaps, or princess. They are both of suitable age, and their beauty is renowned throughout the—" I said. His voice had gone flat and dangerous. "Did I stutter, Minister? Did my words somehow become unclear between my mouth and your ears?" "No, your Magnificence, of course not. I will send for the princess immediately." Bowed low and retreated, his tail tucked tight against his legs in a posture of absolute submission. The other courtiers parted before him like water before a stone, none of them wanting to be associated with whatever was about to happen. Settled back on his throne and waited. He had 7 daughters by his primary wife, the Empress. All 7 were everything a Draconian princess should be. They stood tall and proud, their scales gleaming in shades of ruby and emerald and sapphire. Their crests were magnificent, their tails strong and graceful, their features sharp and beautiful in the way that Draconians had prized for. They were the pride of the empire, each one a treasure beyond price. And then there was his 8th daughter, born of a brief liaison with a lesser noble whose name could no longer remember. The pregnancy had been unremarkable, the birth routine, but the child that had emerged had been wrong from the very first moment. She was small. Draconians grew quickly in their first years, reaching their full height by the age of 10, but had stopped growing while she was still barely 5.5 feet tall, a full 18 inches shorter than the shortest of her sisters. The court physicians had examined her repeatedly, searching for some illness or defect that could explain her stunted growth, but they had found nothing. She was simply small, and there was no cure for that. Her scales were worse. Where a proper Draconian displayed colors that caught the light and demanded attention, scales were a dull gray-brown that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. They looked like stone, like mud, like everything ugly and common in the universe. No matter what treatments were applied or what dyes were attempted, the color remained stubbornly, offensively plain. Her crest was small and lay flat against her skull rather than rising proudly. Her tail was thin and weak. Her features, while technically correct, were delicate in a way that suggested fragility rather than strength. She was, in short, the greatest embarrassment the imperial family had ever produced. had dealt with the problem in the traditional way, had been hidden from court since childhood, kept in distant chambers and excluded from all public functions. Her existence was technically acknowledged but never discussed. When foreign dignitaries visited, she was sent to the country estates. When celebrations were held, she remained in her rooms. She was a dirty secret that the imperial family kept tucked away, mentioned only in whispers and never in polite company. Now finally had found a use for her. The doors at the far end of the throne room opened, and walked in. She moved through the vast space with her head held high, and that immediately irritated. She had always done that, always refused to shuffle and cringe the way someone of her appearance should. She walked as if she had every right to be there, as if her gray scales and stunted body were things to be proud of rather than ashamed of. The courtiers parted before her with expressions of distaste carefully hidden behind masks of polite indifference. A few of the younger ones whispered and giggled behind their claws, making no effort to hide their mockery, ignored them all with the ease of long practice. She came to a stop before the throne and bowed precisely as deep as protocol demanded, not a fraction deeper. "You summoned me, father." Her voice was clear and steady, had always hated that about her too. "Daughter," he let the word hang in the air, savoring it like wine gone to vinegar. "I have wonderful news for you. You are to be married." Something flickered in amber eyes, there, and gone so quickly that might have imagined it. Her expression remained perfectly composed. "To whom, father?" "A human." The gasps from the assembled court were everything it hoped for. Decades of proper breeding and aristocratic composure went out the window as Draconians openly stared, whispered, and exclaimed their shock. Some of them laughed outright, the sound cruel and sharp. Did not gasp. She did not stare. She simply stood there, looking at her father with those amber eyes that saw far too much. "The Terran Confederacy wishes a marriage alliance," continued, raising his voice to carry over the commotion. "They have asked for a princess, and I have decided to grant their request. You will be sent to represent our great empire among these humans." "I see," his voice betrayed nothing. "And when am I to depart?" "Tomorrow. A ship is being prepared as we speak." Smiled, showing all his teeth again. "Try not to embarrass us too badly, daughter, though I suppose that would be difficult, given that your mere existence is already an embarrassment." More laughter from the court. Someone in the back made a joke about humans and their love of ugly things that sent ripples of amusement through the assembled nobles. Stood perfectly still through all of it. "As you command, father." She bowed again, exactly as deep as before, and turned to leave. "One more thing," called after her. "The humans are expecting a princess of the Draconian Empire. They have images of your sisters of proper Draconians. I want you to understand that when they see you instead, they will know exactly what we think of them. You are an insult. You have always been an insult. And now, finally, you will serve the purpose you were born for." Paused at the doors. For a long moment she did not turn around. Then, very quietly, she said, "Thank you for your honesty, father. I have always appreciated knowing exactly where I stand." She walked out, and the doors closed behind her. Laughed again, delighted with his own cleverness. The humans wanted a bride. They would get one. And when they saw the stunted, ugly creature that arrived instead of the gleaming princess they expected, they would understand just how little the Draconian Empire thought of them. It was the perfect joke. Made it all the way back to her chambers before she allowed herself to react. Her rooms were in the eastern wing of the palace, far from the grand suites occupied by her sisters and the bustling corridors where courtiers plotted and schemed. The path there took her through empty hallways and past doors that had been sealed for decades. It was quiet, isolated, and forgotten. Just like her. She closed the door behind her and leaned against it, breathing deeply. Her hands were shaking. She pressed them flat against her thighs and willed them to stop. She would not cry. She had taught herself not to cry years ago, when she had realized that tears only made things worse. They were a sign of weakness, and weakness was something that the imperial court devoured with gleeful appetite. The one time she had wept in public, at the age of 8 when her sisters had destroyed her favorite possession for sport, the memory of her tears had been used against her for years afterward. So she did not cry now. She simply stood there, breathing, until her hands stopped shaking and her heartbeat slowed to something approaching normal. Then she walked to her window and looked up at the stars. The sky above the palace was clear tonight, unpolluted by the lights that blazed in other parts of the capital city. She could see thousands of stars, maybe millions, each one a sun around which worlds orbited. On some of those worlds, beings lived and died and built their civilizations, never knowing or caring that a small gray princess stood watching them from a forgotten corner of a vast palace. Somewhere out there, humans lived, had studied them in secret, accessing information that was technically available to all citizens of the Empire, but which no proper Draconian would ever bother to read. The humans fascinated her. They were everything her people were not. They were small like her. They were soft and scaleless, lacking the natural armor that Draconians considered essential. Their lives were brief, their individual power negligible, and yet somehow, impossibly, they had built a civilization that spanned hundreds of worlds in a fraction of the time it had taken the Draconians to do the same. They had done it through cooperation, the text said, through pooling their weaknesses until they became strengths, through refusing to accept limitations and finding ways around them instead. And they had invented faster-than-light travel by accident. Had laughed when she first read that story. Not the cruel laughter of the court, but genuine delight at the sheer absurdity of it. These small, soft, scaleless creatures had stumbled upon the secret that her people had been seeking for 3 centuries, and they had done it while trying to make better coffee. It was ridiculous, it was impossible, and it was wonderful. She had dreamed sometimes of meeting them, of seeing these strange beings who had accomplished so much with so little, of finding out if the stories were true, if they really were as adaptable and resourceful as the reports claimed. Now she was going to find out. Her father thought he was punishing her. He thought he was sending her into exile, throwing her away like garbage to insult a species he considered beneath contempt. He expected her to be humiliated, rejected, sent back in disgrace to spend the rest of her days in even deeper isolation. He might be right. The humans might take one look at her and understand immediately that they had been mocked. They might send her back, or worse, keep her as a symbol of the Draconian Empire's disdain. She might spend the rest of her life as a curiosity, a joke, a reminder of how little her people thought of anyone different from themselves. But she might not. The humans were unpredictable. All the reports said so. They did things that made no sense by Draconian logic, and yet those things worked anyway. They valued traits that Draconians considered worthless and dismissed characteristics that her people prized above all else. Maybe, just maybe, they would look at her and see something other than a disappointment. Turned from the window and began to pack. She did not have many possessions. A princess of the Empire should have had rooms filled with treasures, closets overflowing with gowns, shelves lined with precious objects. Instead, chambers held only what she needed and a few things she had managed to acquire without attracting notice. Books mostly. Data crystals containing texts that she had studied in private, learning about the universe beyond the Empire's borders. Technical manuals that she had read for pleasure, finding more comfort in the elegant logic of machines than in the cruel games of court politics. A few pieces of jewelry that had been gifts from servants who took pity on her, cheap things by imperial standards but precious to her because someone had thought to give them. And one image, kept hidden beneath her mattress where no one would ever think to look. It was a portrait of her mother. Had never met the woman who had given birth to her. Lady Mirth had been a minor noble, chosen by the emperor for a brief liaison and then dismissed when she became pregnant. She had died in childbirth and had been handed over to the palace nursery staff to be raised as an afterthought. The portrait showed a draconian woman with scales of pale silver and eyes the same amber as own. She was not beautiful by imperial standards. Her features were too soft, her crest too small, but there was something in her expression that had always found compelling. A kind of quiet dignity, perhaps, a refusal to be diminished by circumstances she could not control. Tucked the portrait carefully among her clothes, where it would be safe during the journey. Then she sat down at her desk and began to write. She had learned early in life that information was power. The court might have dismissed her, but it had also ignored her, and being ignored had its advantages. She had been able to move through the palace unnoticed, listening to conversations that were not meant for her ears, reading documents that had been left carelessly unattended. Over the years, she had accumulated a considerable store of knowledge about the empire, its politics, and its secrets. Now she organized that knowledge into a document that she encrypted and stored on a personal data crystal. If the humans were truly as clever as the reports suggested, they would want to know what she knew. And if she was going to start a new life among them, she was going to start it with something to offer. By the time she finished, the three suns were beginning to set, their light turning the sky shades of orange and purple and gold. Watched the colors shift and fade through her window, knowing that it might be the last sunset she ever saw from this world. She felt no sadness at the thought. The next morning came too quickly, and not quickly enough. Rose before dawn and dressed carefully in traveling clothes, simple robes of dark fabric that would not show wrinkles or stains during the long journey. She had no attendants to help her. She had not been allowed attendants since she was 12, when her father had decided that wasting servants on someone of her status was an inexcusable extravagance. She ate a small breakfast alone in her chambers, the food delivered by a kitchen servant who barely looked at her. Then she gathered her single bag of possessions and made her way to the main docking platform of the palace. The ship that waited for her was not impressive. Imperial vessels were typically works of art, their hulls sleek and organic, their surfaces decorated with precious metals and intricate carvings. This ship looked like it had been pulled from a scrapyard and given a hasty cleaning. Its hull was dented and its decorations non-existent, its overall appearance suggesting that it might fall apart if someone looked at it too hard. It was, realized with something that might have been amusement, exactly the kind of ship you would use to transport something you didn't care about. A single crew member waited at the bottom of the boarding ramp, a draconian male with scales of dull brown who looked almost as uncomfortable as the ship itself. "Princess?" he asked, not quite meeting her eyes. "Yes. I'm Captain. I'll be taking you to the human station." He gestured toward the ramp. "If you'll come aboard, we can depart immediately." "No ceremony?" asked. "No formal farewell from the court?" Captain's expression flickered with something that might have been pity. The Emperor felt that a quiet departure would be more appropriate. Of course he did. A public farewell would have required acknowledging that she existed. It would have meant treating her like an actual princess instead of an embarrassing secret. "Very well," said. "Lead the way, Captain." The inside of the ship was marginally better than the outside, but only marginally. The corridors were narrow, the lighting harsh, the accommodations clearly designed for cargo rather than passengers. The cabin that had been set aside for was barely large enough to turn around in, containing a narrow bunk, a small storage unit, and a porthole that looked out on nothing but black space. "The journey will take approximately 3 weeks," Captain said, still not quite looking at her. "We'll be traveling by conventional drive to the edge of Imperial space, where you'll be transferred to a human vessel for the remainder of the trip. Meals will be delivered to your cabin. If you need anything else—" He trailed off, clearly hoping that she would not need anything else. "Thank you, Captain. I'm sure I'll be fine." He nodded once and left quickly, clearly relieved to be away from her presence. sat down on the narrow bunk, and looked around her cramped quarters. This was it then. This was how the eighth princess of the Draconian Empire departed for her new life. No fanfare, no ceremony, no tears of farewell. Just a shabby ship, a nervous captain, and a cabin barely fit for a servant. She thought about how her sisters had departed for their various diplomatic missions over the years, the celebrations that had lasted for days, the crowds that had lined the streets to catch a glimpse of their beauty, the gifts that had poured in from every corner of the empire, tokens of admiration and loyalty. She thought about all of that, and then she started to laugh. It was quiet laughter at first, barely more than a breath. Then it grew, building until her shoulders shook and tears streamed down her face. She laughed until her stomach hurt, until she could barely breathe, until she had to stuff her fist against her mouth to muffle the sound. Because it was funny. It was all so incredibly, absurdly funny. She was free. For the first time in her entire life, she was free of the court that had mocked her, the family that had despised her, the society that had rejected her simply for existing. She was being sent away in disgrace, yes. She was being used as an insult, absolutely. But she was also being given something that she had never dared to hope for. A chance to start over. Whatever waited for her among the humans, it had to be better than what she was leaving behind. Even if they rejected her, even if they sent her back, even if they treated her exactly the way her own people had treated her, at least she would have seen something different first. At least she would have tried. And maybe, just maybe, she would find something there that she had never found at home. Acceptance. The ship shuddered as its engines engaged, and felt the gentle push of acceleration as they lifted away from the palace, away from the world of her birth, away from everything she had ever known. She did not look back. The 3 weeks of travel passed slowly. Captain and his crew of 4 avoided as much as possible, which suited her perfectly. She spent her days reading the materials she had brought, reviewing everything she knew about humans and their civilization. She ate her meals alone, slept in her narrow bunk, and stared out her porthole at the endless stars sliding past. She also prepared. The data crystal she had brought contained more than just information about the Empire. It also contained everything she had been able to find about human customs, human psychology, human history. She studied their languages, their social structures, their values. She learned about their strange obsession with individual rights and personal freedom. She read about their art, their music, their literature. And she practiced. Humans communicated differently than Draconians. They relied heavily on facial expressions and body language, subtle cues that Draconians either did not possess or did not bother to notice. They smiled when they were happy, frowned when they were sad, made eye contact to show respect or interest. They touched each other casually in ways that would be considered shocking intimacy among her people. Stood before the small mirror in her cabin and practiced these expressions. She taught herself to smile without showing her teeth, which humans apparently found threatening. She learned to relax her crest, which had a tendency to rise when she was interested or excited. She practiced softening her features, making herself look less sharp, less predatory, less alien. It felt strange. It felt like putting on a costume, pretending to be something she was not. But she had been pretending her whole life, pretending that the mockery did not hurt, pretending that she did not mind being hidden away, pretending that she was content with her isolation when inside she was screaming. At least this time, she was pretending to be something better. The transfer to the human ship happened without ceremony. They had reached the edge of Imperial space, a region where Draconian influence faded and the border with human territory began. A small station hung in the void between stars, jointly operated by both species, its purpose to facilitate exactly this kind of handover. Captain escorted to the airlock with visible relief. "The humans are expecting you," he said. "They'll take you the rest of the way." "Thank you, Captain," paused at the threshold. For what it's worth, I know this assignment was not easy for you. I'm sure the Emperor made it clear what he expected you to think of me. Scales shifted in a pattern that indicated embarrassment. Princess, You don't need to apologize, I understand. I've understood my whole life. She smiled at him, a genuine expression that she rarely shared with anyone. Safe travels home. She stepped through the airlock before he could respond. The human side of the station was different from anything had ever experienced. The colors were wrong, too bright, too warm, too varied. The proportions were off, ceilings too low, corridors too narrow, everything designed for being smaller than Draconians. The smell was strange, a mixture of recycled air and something organic that she could not identify. And there were humans everywhere. She had seen images, of course. She had studied their appearance in detail, memorizing the variations in their skin tones, the different colors of their head coverings. Hair, she reminded herself, they called it hair, the range of sizes and shapes that their bodies could take. But seeing them in person was different. They moved constantly, their small bodies buzzing with energy. They talked to each other in loud, animated voices, their hands waving, their faces shifting through dozens of expressions. They were so alive. A human female approached her, dressed in what recognized as a formal uniform. She was tiny by Draconian standards, barely 5 feet tall, with dark hair pulled back from her face and eyes that assessed with sharp intelligence. Princess, I'm Commander. I've been assigned to escort you to Neptune Station. She did not bow, but she nodded her head in a gesture that studies told her was respectful. Welcome to human space. Thank you, Commander, returned the nod carefully. I appreciate your welcome. Commander's expression did something complicated, surprise maybe, mixed with something else. You speak standard very well. I have been studying. I wanted to be able to communicate clearly. That's actually really considerate. The commander's tone suggested that she had not expected consideration. Most Draconian diplomats refuse to use anything but their own language. I am not most Draconian diplomats. Another complicated expression. No, I don't suppose you are. This way, please, the ship is waiting. Followed the commander through the station, acutely aware of every human they passed. Some stared openly at her, their eyes wide with curiosity. Others glanced and looked away quickly, their expressions hard to read. A few smiled at her, small, cautious smiles that she tentatively returned. Nobody laughed at her. Nobody whispered cruel jokes behind their hands. Nobody looked at her like she was something disgusting that had crawled out of a sewer. It was the strangest feeling in the world. The human ship was called the Morning Star, and it was nothing like the vessel that had brought from the palace. It was small by Draconian standards, designed for a crew of perhaps 50, but every inch of it seemed to serve a purpose. There was no wasted space, no empty display of wealth. The corridors were functional rather than decorative, the quarters efficient rather than luxurious, and yet somehow it felt more welcoming than any of the grand halls of her father's palace. Commander showed to a cabin that was small but comfortable, with a bed that looked actually soft, a desk with a working terminal, and a porthole that offered a stunning view of the stars. It's not what you're probably used to, the commander said, her tone apologetic. We tried to modify things for Draconian physiology, but we weren't entirely sure what you'd need. It's perfect, said and meant it. Blinked, really. Commander, the cabin I occupied on the Draconian ship was half this size and had no climate control. This is by far the nicest accommodation I have ever had. The silence that followed was heavy with implications that could not quite read. I see, said finally. Her voice was careful now, thoughtful. Princess, may I ask you something? Of course. Why are you here? I mean, really. The diplomatic briefing said this was a marriage alliance, that the Emperor chose you specifically. But everything I've seen so far suggests, she trailed off, clearly unwilling to complete the thought. considered her answer carefully. She could lie, maintain the pretense that she was valued, that her father had sent her as an honor rather than an insult. It would be the politic thing to do. But she was tired of politics. She was tired of pretending. And if she was going to start a new life among these humans, she wanted to start it honestly. "The Emperor sent me because I am an embarrassment to my people," she said quietly. "By Draconian standards, I am small, dull, and ugly. I have been hidden from court my entire life because the sight of me was considered offensive. My father chose me for this alliance because he wanted to insult your people. He expects you to reject me to send me back in disgrace. He thinks it's funny." Stared at her for a long moment, her expression unreadable. Then she said something that never expected. "Well," the commander said slowly, "your father is clearly an idiot." Felt her crest rise in surprise before she could stop it. What? "No offense, princess, but that's one of the dumbest things I've ever heard. You're clearly intelligent, you took the time to learn our language, you've been nothing but polite and considerate since you arrived, and you just told me the truth even though a lie would have been easier." Shook her head. "I don't know what's wrong with Draconians that they'd consider any of that a negative, but we don't share their standards." "You don't care that I'm," struggled to find the words, "that I'm not what you expected." "Princess, I've been in the Navy for 20 years. I learned a long time ago that appearances don't mean anything. What matters is what people do, how they treat others, what they're capable of when things get hard." Smiled, a genuine expression that transformed her entire face. "From what I've seen in the past 10 minutes, I think you might be exactly what we need around here." Felt something crack inside her chest. Some wall that she had built so long ago that she had forgotten it existed. Some defense that had protected her from the endless cruelty of her people. She had spent her entire life being told that she was worthless, that she was ugly, that she was a disappointment to everyone who had the misfortune to know her. And now, in less than an hour among humans, someone had looked at her and seen something worth valuing. "Thank you," she managed, her voice thick. "You have no idea what that means to me." "I think I might have some idea," said gently. "Get some rest, princess. We'll reach Neptune Station in about a week. There's someone there I think you're going to want to meet." She left alone in the cabin, surrounded by soft lighting and comfortable furnishings, and the endless stars outside the window. And for the first time in 20 years, allowed herself to hope. The week aboard the Morning Star passed more quickly than had expected. Commander had not been exaggerating when she said that humans did not share draconian standards. In the days that followed, found herself treated with a respect that she had never experienced before. The crew members spoke to her politely, asked her questions about draconian culture with genuine interest, and invited her to join them for meals in the communal dining area. It was overwhelming at first. She had spent so long being invisible, being avoided, being treated as something shameful that should never be acknowledged. The sudden attention made her nervous, made her wait for the other shoe to drop, for the mockery to begin. But it never did. The humans were curious about her, yes. They stared sometimes, fascinated by her scales, her crest, her tail. They asked questions that would have been considered rude in the imperial court, about her diet, her physiology, her ability to withstand cold or heat. But there was no cruelty in their curiosity. They were simply interested, the same way children were interested in everything new. And they touched each other constantly. Had known about human touch from her studies, but experiencing it in person was something else entirely. They patted each other on the shoulders, hugged in greeting, bumped arms as they walked past each other in the corridors. It was casual, automatic, as natural as breathing. The first time a crew member accidentally brushed against arm, she had frozen in shock. The young man had apologized profusely, clearly worried that he had given offense. "I'm sorry," he had said, his face flushing red in what now knew was embarrassment. "I forgot, I should have been more careful." "It's all right," she had interrupted. I'm just not used to it. Among my people, casual touch is uncommon. Really? The young man, his name was, she learned later, Cole, had looked fascinated rather than repelled. That sounds lonely. Lonely. Had never really thought about it that way before. Draconians did not touch because touch implied intimacy, and intimacy implied vulnerability. It was simply how things were. But looking at these humans, watching how they connected with each other through 1,000 small contacts every day, she began to understand what she had been missing. Yes, she thought it was lonely. She started joining the crew for meals regularly after that. She learned their names, their stories, their jokes. She discovered that humans laughed frequently and about almost anything, that their humor ranged from sophisticated wordplay to what they called dad jokes, which were apparently so bad that they circled back around to being funny. She found that they valued honesty but also kindness, that they would tell you the truth but try to make it gentle. She found that she liked them, more than she had ever liked anyone. And through it all, she kept thinking about what Commander had said. There's someone there I think you're going to want to meet. When asked who it was, had just smiled mysteriously and refused to say more. Neptune Station hung in orbit around the 8th planet of the human home system, a massive structure of metal and glass that served as one of the Confederacy's main diplomatic hubs. It was here that humans met with alien species, negotiated treaties, established the relationships that allowed their civilization to expand through the galaxy at such remarkable speed. It was here that new life would begin. The shuttle from the Morning Star docked at a platform near the station's center and disembarked to find a full honor guard waiting for her. She stopped in shock at the top of the ramp. The soldiers stood in perfect formation, their uniforms crisp, their weapons polished. Behind them, a crowd of civilians had gathered, straining to catch a glimpse of the alien princess. And in front of it all, a man in formal dress stepped forward, bowing deeply in the traditional human gesture of respect. "Princess of the Draconian Empire," he said, his voice carrying across the docking bay. "On behalf of the Terran Confederacy, I welcome you to Neptune Station. We are honored by your presence." Stood frozen, unable to process what she was seeing. This was wrong. This was not how it was supposed to happen. Her father had sent her as an insult, as a joke. There should have been no honor guard, no formal welcome, no crowds gathering to see her. There should have been embarrassment and rejection and confirmation of everything she had been told her entire life. Instead, there was this. "Princess," Commander had appeared at her elbow, her voice gentle. "Are you all right?" "I don't understand," whispered. "Why are they? This is too much. I'm not worth all this." His hand touched her arm, light and warm. "Yes, you are. You're a princess of an alien empire, here to build bridges between our peoples. That makes you one of the most important people on this station." "But I'm not." "You're exactly what you are," interrupted firmly. "And what you are is impressive. Now take a deep breath, walk down that ramp, and let these people welcome you properly." Looked at the commander, at the sincerity in her eyes, and felt something shift in her chest. Maybe, she thought, this was what it felt like to be valued. She took a deep breath, squared her shoulders, and walked down the ramp to meet her new life. The formal welcome took several hours, a blur of introductions and speeches and photographs that left exhausted but strangely exhilarated. By the time it was over, she had shaken more hands, such a strange custom, but she was beginning to find it charming, than she could count. She had smiled until her face ached. She had answered the same questions about draconian culture a dozen times with what she hoped was consistent politeness. And then, finally, she was escorted to the engineering section of the station, where she would apparently be assigned for training. "The diplomatic corps wanted you for ceremonial duties," Commander explained as they walked through corridors that grew progressively less polished and more functional. "But someone argued that you'd be more useful learning about our technology, given your background in technical studies." How did you know about my technical studies? Smiled. We read your file very thoroughly, Princess, including the parts that the Draconian diplomatic service probably didn't mean to send us. Felt her crest rise with embarrassment. I see. Relax. It actually worked in your favor. The person who will be training you specifically requested you when he found out about your engineering background. Who is he? They had reached a large door marked Quantum Systems Laboratory in several languages. Stopped and turned to face, her expression oddly serious. His name is Daniel Price. He's the scientist who accidentally invented the quantum fold drive. He's also brilliant, chronically sleep-deprived, terrible with people, and one of the best engineers in human space. She paused. I should warn you, he didn't want to do this at first. He argued with command for days, said he didn't have time for diplomatic nonsense. But when he saw your file... What? He changed his mind. Immediately. Said that anyone who spent their spare time studying advanced plasma dynamics and quantum theory clearly had potential. Open the door. The laboratory beyond was chaos. Holographic displays floated everywhere, showing equations and schematics and diagrams that did not immediately recognize. Equipment was scattered across every available surface, some of it assembled, some of it in pieces, some of it apparently being used as coffee cup holders. The lighting was dim in some areas and blinding in others, with no apparent pattern. And in the middle of it all, surrounded by floating mathematics and muttering to himself, stood a human male. He was not tall, even by human standards. His hair was brown and stuck up in multiple directions, as if he had been running his hands through it repeatedly. His glasses were smudged. His uniform was wrinkled. He looked like he had not slept in days, which studies told her might actually be true based on human work habits. He looked up as they entered, and saw his eyes behind those smudged glasses. They were dark brown, almost black, and they were alive with an intelligence that reminded her of the stars outside her cabin window. Princess, his voice was distracted, most of his attention still on the equations surrounding him. I'm Daniel Price. I understand you're supposed to be learning about our technology. He waved a hand vaguely at the chaos around him. Welcome to the Quantum Systems Lab. Try not to touch anything that's glowing, and if something starts making a noise like an angry cat, please let me know immediately. Stared at him, at this strange, rumpled, brilliant human who had created the impossible by accident, and apparently could not be bothered to comb his hair. It's an honor to meet you, Dr. Price, she said. He finally focused on her fully then, his eyes sharpening as they took in her appearance. She braced herself for the same assessment she always received, the same calculation of her deficiencies. Instead, he smiled. The honor is mine, Princess. Your work on plasma dynamics was fascinating. Did you really derive a new approach to containment field modulation on your own? Because I have about 17 questions about your methodology, and also I think you might be able to help me figure out why this stupid drive keeps doing things that violate the laws of physics. Felt something warm bloom in her chest. I would be happy to help, she said. And for the first time in her life, she genuinely meant it.